I want to introduce my friend Eugene Sutton. Officially, he is the Right Reverend Eugene Sutton, Episcopal Bishop of Maryland, but more importantly, a friend since the days that Catherine and I lived in the DC area. Amongst other things, Eugene and I were part of a book group that he put together as a birthday present for his wife Sonia. So take note if you're looking for a creative gift at some point. So Eugene, thanks for making the time to talk on this very imperfect platform. I'm going to do my best to channel some combination of Krista Tippett and Terry Gross, but welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for getting my title right. You know, in the Episcopal Church, we have more titles than people, and so we have a.
I had to look it up to tell you the truth.
People sometimes ask what to call me, and I'd say, "Oh, humbly, just call me Your Excellency." That was, but no one's ever called me that. They all call me Eugene.
All right. Well, that's what we're going to go with. Like I said, I had to look it up to find. I had a vague recollection that you had some official title. There are two things that I want to talk with you about this morning, and they're interrelated, at least in my mind, they are. One is race, which is not at all a new problem, but has claimed our attention in a new way since the murder of George Floyd and others. The second is more general, and it's how do we know personally when to get more deeply involved in any issue or societal need? And when do we need to step back? That's more of a discernment question. Given the limits on our time and energy, how do we make those decisions? Mm-hmm. So we're going to get around to both, but let's start with race. I'm curious, and you can start wherever you want on this, but I'm curious to know how you feel about the increased attention given to racial inequality these days. Is this encouraging to you? Are you cynical about it? Does it depend on the day?
I'm encouraged, largely encouraged, especially in this time. You know, Doug, this year, 2020, we've had a viral spring and a viral summer, is what I've called it. And that is, of course, dealing with the virus of COVID-19 and how that's affecting us all. It's very fearsome, and it's causing us all to go crazy. But then we're also dealing with this other virus, I call it the virus of 1619. Because in 1619, that's when Africans were first brought over to these shores as slaves. For the past 400 years then, we've been dealing with that virus of slavery, segregation, and racism. And it's also making us crazy. It's very fearsome. Mm-hmm. And when you add all to that, when you add to those two viruses, the virus of anger and violence. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing an increase in all three of those viruses. And the thing about viruses is that they need weak systems in order to do their damage. Weaken human bodies, of course, but in the virus of 1619, the virus of racism, it also attacks weak bodies. And those bodies are weakened by injustice. So I'm very heartened, I'm very encouraged rather by the what we've seen this year in an eruption of awareness about the evils of racism and what that virus is doing to all of us. It's affecting all of us and it's bringing us all down.
It's more clear what that is doing to persons of color. What is the virus of racism doing to me, a privileged white male?
I am so glad you asked. First, let me get to me. And then
Let's start with you.
These eruptions began at the end of May when in Minneapolis, George Floyd was laying on that pavement in the city streets of Minneapolis. And that police officer, that white police officer, just kneeled on him, his knees on his neck for almost 9 minutes. And he said he couldn't breathe. And of course he died. That becomes an image for all Black and brown people all over the world. We can't breathe. And we've been telling you this for a long time. It's killing some of us outright, but it's slowly killing people of color. And we want you to get your knees off our necks. We want you to get your knees off, which is to say, take away the yoke of racial injustice, of of profiling, of redlining, of segregating, of diminishing, of belittling. Take your knees off. We can't breathe. And remedies for that are really remedies that are going to help all of us, because what does it do to a white person? This is why I'm glad to have dialogue. I don't know, but I have a big suspicion that white folk and black folk in this country, we want the same thing. We want racial harmony. We want to live in peace, and we want equality and justice for all. The thing is that for those in power, it's so difficult for them to make any changes that might be perceived as diminishing their power. And so they won't do the things that are necessary, but it slowly erodes at their dignity. Racism robs everyone of their dignity, of course with black and brown people, but it robs white persons of their dignity, of their humanity. And that's corrosive.
When we talked about this in our kitchen a few weeks ago, you made a comment that really struck me. I don't remember what I asked, but it may have come about as my invitation to you to have this conversation, and what can we do? And you said something. This is a paraphrase, so you'll correct me. But it's like, yeah, great, fine, we can talk. But what I really want is, do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Yes. This is a time to have more dialogue and more conversation across the different racial ethnic groups, and that's needed. We need to do that. But even more so, I want white persons to talk among themselves. When I say I, it's hard to speak for everybody, but I know I speak for most African Americans. In any organization large enough, you're going to have various caucuses. The women are going to caucus. African Americans are going to caucus. Latinos are going to caucus. I have Asian Americans in my diocese. They need to get together sometimes for common support, and how can we help each other? When it comes to race, I want white people to have that conversation among themselves. Talk to your brothers and sisters, your uncles and your aunts, your grandchildren. Have those kinds of conversations. And I'm going to give you permission. I'm writing the permission slip right now. Eugene Sutton, I'm giving white people permission to talk among themselves about race. You don't need us to have a conversation. You can do it. Really, you can. And it'll do two things. One, I think more honesty will come out, because I find that many white people who are well-meaning, they're afraid to have the conversation because they're afraid, oh, I may say something that will offend, or I won't say the right thing, or I will be exposed as not really being woke. And so you can get beyond that. But also, white people can then support one another to be not only sad about racism, but to actually become anti-racist, to be proactive in diminishing racism, so that we can all breathe.
Yeah, that's helpful. So I want to broaden this out a little bit. The theme for this issue of our newsletter is around in any relationship, of which racial relationship is one, but in any, there's a time to step towards, to be more involved, to be more active, and then there's other times to step back, perhaps because of the season of life, or for any number of reasons. I think about myself when, for instance, when our kids were born and my travel for my work picked up, I had to step back just because there's 24 hours in a day, I had to step back in terms of some of the things that were very important to me, but just the reality of my life. And so one of the things we're trying to do is help people explore this topic of discernment, of like, when do you move towards a relationship, an issue, a cause? When do you need to step back? And I'm just curious to know what informs those decisions for you, because I'm only guessing, and you can speak to this either personally or as a leader of a large organization. You have people all the time coming to you with very important issues, I'm guessing, saying, we need your support, we need resources, how do you make those discernment kind of questions about what's most important or prioritizing?
Well, one of the things that that makes me an Episcopalian and Anglican spirituality is we're largely Benedictine. The Book of Common Prayer is based on a community of prayer that Saint Benedict, instituted in his rule of Benedict. Hmm. And Benedictine spirituality, at its base, is about balance. It's prayer and work, prayer and work. It is that time of stepping back, and it's the time of stepping forward. And so in my personal life, I'm helped by having those moments of distancing, where I can distance from my outer self and my inner self in contemplation. I do centering prayer and lead workshops and conferences on centering prayer. And we do that a lot in my diocese. I lead a group personally in my diocese every week at our cathedral on centering prayer. And we tape that for everyone. Well, so that's the rhythm. And the rhythm is rest and work. It's prayer and work, activity and stepping back. I think for a society, it's going to be the same. But if I can make a link between discernment of when to act and when not to act, and the racial issues that we were talking about earlier, it would be this. Generally speaking, those who benefit from the status quo, they are most unwilling to act and be more passive. Those who do not benefit from the status quo are always saying, now's the time to act. And so in 1964, Martin Luther King Jr., he wrote a book called Why We Can't Wait. That book was written after the bombing in Birmingham in 1963 of the 16th Street Baptist Church. 4 little girls were killed and many more injured. And Martin Luther King was getting pressure from many in the Black community saying, time now to act and really turn up the heat and let our anger be expressed. And then many white Christians were saying to Martin Luther King Jr., just wait, step back, let things unfold as they are. You're pushing too hard. And so he wrote that book, Why We Can't Wait. Out of that book, or rather a big part of that book, was the letter from the Birmingham jail, where it challenged white Christians. So here's my challenge to white Christians now. Now's the time to act. Now's the time to step up your game. And we're going to do it in various ways. Howard Thurman, of course, I'm a big fan of Howard Thurman, that great African-American pastor and mystic. He, during the time of the Civil Rights Movement, he rarely talked, he rarely led marches or was out there in marches or pressing in the political realm. He had another way, another contemplative way, and he supported the movement. He supported King in the ways that he could. Some of us are in the, some of us march, some of us write, some of us talk, and some of us pray. And the discernment is to know which is more us.
Well, and related to that, I think you're raising such a good point, and it's, or what I hear in that is that we need to know, number one, there's the systematic thing of if you're in power, you have more invested in the status quo. And then there's our own personality types. I think some of us are wired more as activists and some less so. So what I know about myself is that it is not my nature primarily to be out there on the front protest lines. And so for me to be aware of that I tend to default towards not doing that. And I hear what you're saying, that it's not everyone doing exactly the same thing. There's different ways to be active. Being active isn't just in the streets, but to just be aware of what our comfort position is so we can push against that a little.
Oh, yes. Yes. I'm completely behind the Black Lives Matter movement. Of course, that means all lives matter. But we need to, but in an era where policemen feel free to sit on the neck of Black people, we have to highlight that. so that all of us can breathe. Well, I'm completely behind it, but I haven't marched at all this spring and this summer. One of the reasons is I'm 66 years old and I'm taking care of a 95-year-old mother.
Mm.
And I've got responsibilities such that I have some other underlying health conditions because I'm a Black man in America. And we know that issues of blood pressure, of diabetes, of asthma, are rampant in the Black community. I call it the racism tax.
Hmm.
Uh, it affects us health-wise. So so I'm not out there, but here's what I do have. I have a mouth,
Hmm.
and I have words,
Mm-hmm.
and I can convene people. I can initiate conversations. I talked to the governor of Maryland just 2 days ago, telling him about some of our concerns in the Black community and what we can do about it. That's what I can do.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother was 103 years old, and she wasn't able to do much. You know what she did every day? Every single day, she prayed for just about every corner of this earth, and she spent hours in prayer.
Yeah.
And she talked to, and she raised like 10 sons and daughters, and with the grandma and great grandma to us all, she encouraged us all. The ripple effect was great. So that was her part. Yeah. That was it's all a matter of rhythm and discernment, but all of us, 100% of us, need to do something sometime.
Yeah, yeah. Got one more question, and I don't know if it's even a question, but I was thinking, in getting ready for this conversation, I was thinking about Thomas Merton's letter to a young activist, and I don't remember exactly how it goes, but the idea was something like, if you depend on results, you're going to burn out, basically. That's not why you do this. You do this because it's the right thing to do. Does that speak at all to this conversation?
Oh, absolutely. We're in this for the long haul. If you want to go, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, take some others with you. And of course, that takes some time. That means you have to slow down. I also think about the serenity prayer, that great prayer, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Here's what I did with the clergy of my diocese a couple of weeks ago. Just on that phrase of the prayer, in an hour, I asked my clergy, what things in your life do you need to accept that you personally cannot change? And then after some silence and prayer and then conversation, we went to the second one. What things in your life, what courage do you need to do the things you know you ought to do, but you lack the courage? And we spent some time in prayer for that. And then the third is, how might we pray for you for the wisdom for what you should be doing right now? Yeah. That is a good word on which to end, I think. I appreciate the breaking down of that. And I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing in the world, your calling, and I appreciate your friendship. So thanks. And I appreciate you and your work always. Go Hope College.